so many people just feel like they're not enough, right? And so then they're like, well, I've got to move the goalpost to achieve another thing so that I can feel like I'm enough. And even the people that are at like the tippy top of their game, right? Whether in, a Fortune 10 company or an Olympian, and they're just like, it's not enough. It's never enough, right? Well, like I have to keep contributing in order to feel worthy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh, and this is the Healing Catalyst podcast. I'm a medical doctor with over 20 years of experience and also a lifelong practitioner of Ayurveda. I created the Healing Catalyst podcast because we all deserve a different kind of conversation about health, one that's honest, holistic, and rooted in both science and soul. On this show, I'm joined by the world's leading experts to give you science-backed tools that you can start using today and actually stick with to build real health and longevity. I am so glad you're here. Now let's get to it. Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Healing Catalyst podcast. I'm Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh, and I am so glad that you're back with me again this week. So if you've ever pushed yourself to the edge, running on caffeine, ignoring the whispers from your body, or equating your worth with your work, and you're not alone here, then this episode is for you. As an Ayurvedic practitioner and a physician, I see this every day in my patients. I see how everyday things like poor sleep, dehydration, disconnection, and chronic stress slowly chip away at our health until our bodies just say no more, right? They stop us in our tracks. And so today in this episode, we're going to redefine ambition so that we can be ambitious and still reach our goals without sacrificing our health. And yes, this really is possible. My guest today is Amina AlTai. Amina is an executive coach, leadership trainer, proud immigrant, and chronic illness advocate. She works at the intersection of wellness and well-being and ambition, guiding high-performing founders, creatives, and executives towards lives of greater meaningful impact and sustainable success. She's the author of the book, The Ambition Trap: How to Stop Chasing and Start Living, and also a coach to leaders at companies like Google, Meta, Roku, Snap, Outdoor Voices, NYU, and Huge. In our conversation, Amina and I talk about how to recognize the core wounds that drive burnout, like perfectionism, martyrdom, and control, and the practical tools we can use to address these wounds and regulate our nervous systems so that we don't literally die working. We also talk about how to identify our zones of genius and align ambition with purpose instead of pain, and how your dosha, your Ayurvedic mind-body constitution, can really help you understand these patterns of overwork, burnout, and imbalance. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how to shift from painful ambition that's driven by wounds and worthiness traps to purposeful ambition that's rooted in wholeness, confidence, and true well-being. And if you're curious about what your Ayurvedic dosha is, head over to myarvasi.com and you can take a free assessment there. In Ayurveda, your dosha, which is your mind-body type, it's unique to you. It can really help you understand why you push so hard, why you give so much, and why you burn out so easily. It'll give you insight into your patterns so that you can really begin to find a way to live more sustainably, work better, and feel well. All right, let's dive into the episode. Hi, Amina. I am so excited to be here with you finally today to do this podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to sit with you, and I'm just extra delighted to be here today.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk to you because I have been talking to you about your book since it came out earlier this year. I was at your book launch here in Chicago, and I've had a chance to read it, and I'm just really excited to dive into everything that you've written about because I found it really inspiring, and I feel like right now people really are so overloaded with trying to sort of just make it through the world in general, but then wanting to feel productive, wanting to feel successful in whatever they're doing because we're all looking for meaning in some way, right? Especially when the world around us is so difficult to control. We want to control what we're doing. So I think that this is a really important conversation to have, especially for women. So
Thank you.
I want to jump into what you wrote about. A lot of your personal story is weaved through this book, which I always think is so interesting because I think so many of us, we teach what we need to learn. I think that we end up writing about what we're teaching because we want to learn it ourselves, right?
Yes, 100%.
And so, I was so struck by your story in the beginning of the book when you talk about really being just a few days away from organ failure, having a chronic illness, and you were still working. What were some of the beliefs that you had that kept you striving, even though you knew that your body was breaking down? I mean, you're close to organ failure.
Yeah.
What keeps you going in that moment?
So it's really interesting. I tell the story often about the moment that I get the call from my doctor, but what I don't often tell people, so my doctor told me, like, go to the hospital, don't go to work. But the
Right.
second half of the story is that I went to work. I didn't go to the hospital. And it took the whole day of like that news really landing in my body for me to be like, maybe I should go to the hospital. But I think that there were a couple of things at play. First of all, it was the seventh doctor that I'd been to. And I think I felt pretty gaslit, to the point that I was like, maybe these symptoms aren't real. Like maybe it is in my head, right? So I think that there was that piece.
Right.
But I also come from a lineage that just was told, like, you just tough it out, right?
Right.
And when I actually looked at the stories and I looked at the lineage, on my mom's side, there were people that literally like did backbreaking work and died as a result of their like illness or injury from their work. Like my mom's side of the family were coal miners. And so a lot of them died from like lung cancer or cancers from the mine, that kind of thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's literally a story here that you work yourself to death. And
Mm,
that was such an illuminating moment for me to see that.
right. So that was one of the beliefs, that you work yourself to death, would you say?
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And then also it's like, I don't think I believed my own symptoms. Like, is this real? Like, is this like a bid for attention? Like,
Mhm.
there was a big part of me that didn't even believe it.
Right. So it's almost like you didn't actually believe yourself in what you were feeling either.
Yeah. And then, of course, I couldn't believe the smaller whispers, right? If I didn't believe the big
Mm.
shout, how could I believe the smaller whispers?
Right. That's something that I talk about so much in my work, is that these symptoms are not symptoms. They are symptoms, but they're really signals
Mm.
that your body's trying to tell you something. And so
Yeah.
many of us will just ignore it. And it's not because we're just trying to be a hero or a shero and like just work through the pain. It's actually these core beliefs, right, that
Mhm.
are underneath that. And
Yeah.
so I'm really curious, this idea of working yourself to death.
Mhm.
But then is that really worth it for success if you're gonna die? Like,
Right. It
right?
doesn't make any sense when you bring it to the conscious, rational level. It doesn't make any sense.
Right, right. You've worked with so many people. What would you say are some of these core beliefs that are sort of underneath this ambition or this success that keeps people just wanting more and just pushing harder, even though their body's giving them the signals?
Yeah. I think so many of us, the root of it is we don't feel inherently worthy, right? And we don't feel
Mm,
worthy or lovable. And so we think that if we prove our worthiness through our work, that makes us inherently more valuable or more lovable. So many of the women that I work with, a lot of them are women of color, a lot of them have chronic illness. They fall into the
mhm.
category of historically excluded.
Right.
And I think for so many of us, because of what we've experienced systemically, and then we internalize a lot of that, we think like, I have to work twice as hard to be seen as valuable. And so we double down on those efforts and we believe them ourselves, but then we're the ones that end up taking a hit for it.
Yeah, so it's almost like it's not only part of our lineage, as you pointed out with, your story, but it's also a learned behavior of the environment that we are living in, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's coming from every direction.
Yeah. I have this one client and she's magnificent and also, grew up it's sort of in a very similar lineage to mine and just didn't feel like she was inherently valuable, felt like she had to demonstrate her worth through her work.
Mhm.
And she would always be like the first one in, the last one out, right? Because
Right.
somebody early in her career was like, hey, you're not the smartest person in the room, but you're the hardest working person in the room. So double down on that.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
And like, that's not even true, right? She's an exceptionally bright human, but somebody else through their bias and their lens was like, hey, you're not the smartest. So you need to just be the hardest working person here. And she lived by that until we looked at it and it's not the truth, right? So why are we measuring our success or our worthiness or our productivity against somebody else's definition or story?
Right, right. And so it's just coming at the cost of our health, our physical health, our emotional health, right? I mean, we know that this chronic stress, this pushing, pushing, pushing can deregulate the HPA axis, right? And that is controlling our release of cortisol. So really what
Mhm.
happens is this chronic stress will cause the continuous release of cortisol to the point where at some point we are not as sensitive to the cortisol and the cortisol doesn't really help us. And so we go from this hyperactive state, which I think is what helps push us in the beginning, right? That stress response, you go into overdrive. It's, you're like really focused, you get everything done. But then if that's the way you are for years upon years, right? It leads to burnout because at some point the cortisol, you're not responding to the cortisol anymore, right? So
Right.
it's physiological too. So it's so
Mhm.
interesting how our mind is so connected to our body and our
Yeah.
physiology, right? So these core beliefs, these deep beliefs that we hold can actually change our physiology,
100%.
right?
100%.
Yeah, yeah. So I would really love to dive into that. So, if somebody is feeling like they might have sort of this misaligned ambition, let's say,
Mhm.
right? Where their beliefs and their brain is telling them to do something, but their body's telling them to do something else, right? And we often don't realize until it's too late. What are some of the early signs that you have really heard women tell you about that retrospectively they're like, oh my gosh, I should have known from these signs, these physical, emotional, mental signs? Because I think that so many women, so many people don't know what those signs are
Right.
until it's too late,
Yeah.
right? So what are some of those signs that you've found?
On the physical side of things, there's a lot of fatigue, there's a lot of
Mhm,
GI issues, back issues. Those are kind of the classics.
mhm,
And then on the emotional side of things, I see a lot of people starting to feel extreme negativism and cynicism toward their work, right? Something that they used to love and care deeply about, they just feel really distant from.
mhm,
And even to the point where, coworkers that they used to love or clients that they used to love or other constituents that are part of their core community, they just feel really distant from and they have sort of less patience for.
uh-huh,
Even noticing things like having trouble getting started at the beginning of their day, right? They used to kind of just dive right in and have no problem. And now it just takes that extra oomph of caffeine or effort to be able to jumpstart their energy for the day. But a lot of the times it is really those emotional pieces that those are the ones that they'll listen to more so than the physical symptoms, right? When they can no longer tolerate the work, when they
right,
can no longer tolerate the space that they're in, then they're like, okay, now I'll make a change. And
mhm,
then they happen to also look at the physical symptoms at the same time.
right. And so what would you say are maybe like 3 signals that you always hear people talk about that show you that your ambition might be hurting you? It's not productive anymore. It's gone to that place of really unhealthy and not good for you. What are some things that maybe people who are listening could just be looking out for if they're like, oh my gosh, I have all 3 of those things. Maybe I
Yeah.
need to sit down and think about this.
Yeah. Can I give you more than three?
Oh, you can give me as many as you want.
So in the book, I talk about there's ambition is neutral and natural. I define it as a desire for more life, right? A wish to unfold or grow, which is inherent in every living thing on the planet. But
Sure.
there's two orientations of it. There's painful ambition driven by the core wounds, and then there's
Mm,
purposeful ambition that's connected to our deeper truth, our bigger why.
mhm,
So the core wounds, right? What are they? Rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And we each have one, two, three, or all five of these wounds. It's just a very human rite of passage.
right.
And then as a result of the wounds, we wear a corresponding mask. The masks show up a lot in my clients' lives. If you had an abandonment wound, the mask you wear is dependence. If you had a rejection wound, the mask you wear is avoidance or withdrawal, like you're withdrawing from things or you're avoiding throwing your hat in. If you have a humiliation wound, which is where you feel like your caregivers were embarrassed of you, you wear a masochism or martyrdom mask. Now, this is a big one for my clients. So we'll come back to this. The next one is betrayal. If we felt like our caregivers didn't live up to expectations, the mask we wear is control, another big one for my clients.
Yep.
And then the last one is injustice. So if we felt like our individuality in childhood was restrained, the mask we wear is rigidity, AKA perfectionism. So those last three show up for my clients in really big ways. So sort of the more burned out we are, the more we're indexing usually into those masks, right? We feel
Right.
like everything's out of control. We'll double down on the control. We have this inability to live in an imperfect world. So we need more of that perfection. We're taking on more of the burden because we feel like other people are just going to let us down. We tend to over index on those masks. And so
Right.
that's a really great place for people to start, is just noticing our wounds and the masks that we're wearing. And can we start to bit by bit give up those masks?
Okay, so you literally have described me. I'm just sitting here. I'm like, oh my gosh, is this a therapy session? Those are, I mean, I identify with every single one of those. The last three
Th-
exactly. Because
Those are my three too.
yeah, as soon as, and it might be, and we'll talk about Ayurveda too, because this is like very Pitta. It's very fire.
Yeah.
So that's so interesting. So it's really wounds and masks. And it's really probably tuning into the masks because that's what you are doing, right? That's the behavior that you're exhibiting.
It's interesting. I find that it's about a 50-50 split. Some people really know their wounds. They're
Okay.
like, I have a rejection wound. I'm very aware of it. So like, I really know that one. But some people find their way in through the mask where they're like, you know what? I do have that perfectionism tendency. I do have that need for control, or I
Okay.
can martyr myself. And so I find it's kind of split how people find their way in.
Right. And so what are you supposed to do with that? So you have that information. Now what? Now what do you do?
I believe, like, as a coach, and what I've seen is awareness is 80% of it, right? Because as soon as you become aware, then you're able to shift. I've told this story a few times now, but my younger sister is a psychotherapist. And like 10 years ago, I was helping her move at the time. And she was like, can I put all of my boxes in your apartment? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And it was like, 40, 50 boxes, like a one bedroom
Right.
apartment. And I lived in a one bedroom, and she's trying to put all the boxes from her one bedroom in my one bedroom. And I like had a meltdown, and she was like, love you, girl, but you're controlling. And I was like, huh, I am. Like, I had, until that point, I had no idea that I was controlling. And
Hmm.
like, that was a bit of an extreme ask, right? But I think it also brought out my extreme control side.
Sure.
And then I just started to notice it everywhere. I was like, oh my gosh, she is right. I try to control everything, and I had no idea.
Hmm.
So just moment to moment, the practice of, I see in this moment, my nervous system feels like it can't find resonance, right? There's dysregulation happening. I
Sure.
feel unsafe.
Right.
And what I want to lean on is control, because that's my lifeboat. That's how I get to safety. What could it look like in this moment if I found safety another way? And so just using these moment to moment practices, and over time, thanks to neuroplasticity,
Sure.
that can become our new way of being. And we don't have to lean into the old way of control if that's the mask that we're using.
Right. So it's really the awareness, right? It always goes back to awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, how can we invite ourselves into choosing again, and some support tools that allow us to feel safe in those moments that we don't?
Hmm. So, what is one goal, like ambitious goal, that you had to let go of that really actually helped you heal? Because I think so many of us, like you have said, have these ambitions, these needs for success that are rooted in proving ourselves, right? I know
Mhm.
that I have that, right? I definitely have that of like wanting to
And
prove to the world that I am X, Y, and Z from core wounds, right? So what is an ambition that you kind of had to walk away from to allow yourself to sort of move forward in this healthy way?
I love this question, and nobody asks me this question, so it's fantastic. I think one of the biggest goals that I've had to walk away from is the idea of growing my business to a certain size. And I'm curious if you felt this way, like in the entrepreneur space, right? It's like first you get to 6 figures, then you get to 7 figures, then you get to 8 figures. Then they're like, let's go to 9 figures.
Right.
And it's just never ending.
Yeah.
And I really struggled to get my business to a certain point, right? I remember being part of this 7 figures founders group and just feeling like such a fraud in that room. I was like, I'm hanging by a thread. Like, you all are amazing. Like, just really struggling to get there and stay there and all the things. But I actually realized that was not my work, right? It's like, sure, there are things that we have agency over and things that we can impact, right? But what I really realized is that actually the most important part of owning a business for me is that it helps us find and heal and integrate our shadows. I was like, whether I get to 8 figures or not, whatever it is, like, it doesn't even matter, right? That's actually not the point. The point for me was to be deeply in service. The
Yes.
point of me was to be really sort of dedicated to divine purpose. and to learn and come here for my soul's growth. If I hit those numbers by virtue of that, that's an awesome cherry on top, but that's not the come from. And when I shift the orientation, so the come from was I need to get to this like revenue milestone,
Mhm.
it was such frenetic energy. It
Right.
was really chaos, right?
Mhm.
And then when I came back to the intention and the why, just everything flowed so differently. And so I'm always inviting myself back to that intention and the why, but I really had to let go of these sort of number goals that so much of the community that I'm surrounded by
Yeah.
defines their success by.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you for sharing that because I know that's very personal, but I think that's so many of us. We live in this Western culture where the measures are productivity, how much output you have. So output in the form of, your creativity, the books you've written, the articles you've written, the interviews you've done, like I mean, the money you've made, promotions you've gotten, everything is this external measure.
Mhm.
And so again, we're a product of the environment that we live in. And so we start to measure ourselves by that, right?
Yeah.
I think what you're speaking about is sort of this measurement of instead of, am I fulfilling my purpose? And that's an internal measurement
Yeah.
because no one else can tell you what your purpose is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So in the book, I talk about contentment. And it's so funny because, as I talk to more people about ambition, they're like, I'm sorry, in a conversation about ambition, we're talking about contentment. Like, how do those pieces sit side by side? And I'm like,
Right.
well, for purposeful ambition, which is what I want to talk about, they need to. And so there was a researcher from Eastern Bhutan, and contentment translates into English as either the knowledge of enough or unconditional wholeness. And I
Mhm.
love that so much, right? Because it's internal, right? This internal measure of enough, right? This idea
Right.
that regardless of what's happening outside of ourselves, we're unconditionally whole. And
Right.
I think, particularly in the West, we're not taught to think that way. It's so counterintuitive to how we're taught to think, but it cultivates so much more peace,
Yeah.
right? And not looking for the next dopamine hit,
Right.
the next revenue milestone, book milestone. It's like, I know
Mhm.
those things are nice, right? And I want to get
Right.
my work into the hands of people, as do you.
Yeah.
But whether I do or don't, I have the knowledge of enough.
Right. And so, I mean, it's not only good for your peace, as you said, but it's also really good for your health, right? I mean, we know there are so many studies that show that if you have a sense of purpose, and they've done a lot of studies actually in centenarians, right? I mean, the
Mm,
blue zones, like, but this applies to all of us, right? And there are
mm,
studies that are on younger people too, is that when you have a sense of purpose, you have a lower mortality. And that is from every disease. I mean, we know specifically for cardiovascular disease, for your blood pressure, even for mood disorders, right?
mm.
A sense of purpose, sense of connection to your purpose and to others really is good for your health. It's not just for your peace, right?
Mm.
How did you see that sort of manifest for you going from being on the brink of organ failure? And again, I know that there's probably many years and many things that went in between, going from there to there. But how did you see that sort of manifest for you of going from this place where you were so unhealthy? How did it show up in your health? Like letting go of that goal?
Yeah, it's really interesting because for me, it was almost like a bit of a light switch moment where I fully understood the cost of working in the old way that I was working. And I just had this moment where I was like, we spend more of our heartbeats at work than we do anywhere else. Like, if it is not purposeful, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Like, it was just so clear to me. And I was like, oh, I want to help other people do this and really unearth their purpose because we spend so much time here. It has to feel aligned, right?
Right.
We all have different relationships with work and things like that, but
Mhm.
I can't be the person that clocks in, clocks out. It has to be meaningful for me.
Right.
But what's really interesting is like it's actually shown up in my blood work, and particularly in the last like 3 years as I've immersed myself more into nervous system work. I have a family history of cardiovascular disease, right? I've had high cholesterol since I was 25, and mine was like 8 times higher than it needed to be. And it dropped 2,000 points in the last year to the point that my doctor was like, what did you do? And I was like, I kid you not, have done nothing differently except for more nervous system work. And so I think that a lot of these practices that we think are like extra or too simple actually
Mhm.
can move the needle in the biggest ways, right? Even just like for me, one of the things that I notice makes the biggest difference, I live right next to a park. If I'm feeling really out of my body, I'm like, okay, just go spend 10 minutes in
Yeah.
the park. Notice the leaves, feel
Yeah.
the breeze, look at the clouds. And it's just like a switch. And it's extra cool that it gets to show up in the blood work too.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that story. I mean, again, these are the simple things that actually are so powerful, but people will assume because it's quote simple that it's easy and it's, oh, how's that going to work? Right. Because we're all so, again, programmed to think that everything worth doing has to be difficult.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
It's not.
It's not true.
It's actually really cool to just like sit in this with you for a second, because I think about all the years where I was like so obsessive about like eating correctly and moving
Right.
correctly. And then the thing that actually moved the needle for me was really the simplest.
Right, right. It's amazing. I always say this, like, I'll have people who will come up to me after every talk I do and they'll say, Dr. Kumar Singh, I have changed my diet. I'm eating X, Y, and Z. I eliminated all this stuff. I still don't feel well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, let's look at what's going on beyond the food.
Yeah.
What's going on in your relationships? What's going on in the spaces that you work, live, and play in? What's going on with your sense of purpose, your career, right? All of these things. And the light bulbs start to go off and they're like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that. So
Yeah.
it's exactly what you're saying. They're so focused on the food. And again, no shade to that because that is really important, but it's not the whole story.
It's not. I was thinking about this today and I hadn't thought about this in a very long time, and it must have been subconsciously because our interview was coming up. But the doctor that diagnosed me was a Western practitioner, but she was also an Ayurvedic practitioner.
Oh.
And ironically, right?
Yeah.
And then it was really interesting because, yeah, she gave me a whole protocol and she was like, you need to work with a hematologist and like all these things. But you
Sure.
know what she also did? She sent me to therapy.
Mm.
And I remember being like, what? And I was like, okay, but I'm a good student. So I went. But I think it was exactly the right thing, right? I think I
Right.
needed to go to therapy. And
Right.
I kind of think of that and chuckle sometimes. I'm like, she knew.
Yeah, so something that's coming up for me as we're talking about this is that I often have this debate with people who are a little bit younger than me, who are in my life on my team. I have a lot of, 30-year-olds, even 20-year-olds on my team. And this is something that comes up a lot, this discussion of we really want to find purpose and meaning in what we're doing.
Mhm.
I love that. I get it.
Mhm.
And also, there is a point where you have to do the work, right?
Yeah.
So how do you straddle that line? Because it's almost like I feel like sometimes people who always are talking about having purpose and looking for purpose and meaning, sometimes it's an excuse to not do the work.
100%.
How do we kind of bridge that gap? It's a hard one for me sometimes to answer without
Mhm.
sounding really harsh because I don't want to be one of those people who's like, well, I had to do X, Y, and Z, and I was
Yeah.
hazed and blah, blah, blah. So you got to do it. I don't want to have that attitude, but I also want to be realistic. So when my kids are saying to me, well, why did X, Y, and Z not happen? Why am I not promoted? Why am I not this, that, and the other? I'm like, okay, you just like graduated from college 3 years ago. Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, I don't want to squash that really important piece which you're talking about, which is having purpose and meaning.
Yes, this is such a good question. And there's a distinction between having purpose and meaning and having perfection, right? And I think sometimes we conflate those things of to have purpose means that my job, my work, my contribution feels 100% perfect. I don't believe in that, right? So I reference Stephen Cope's work in my book, and he wrote this book called The Great Work of Your Life. And he defines it as purpose as bringing forth the best that's within you. And I love that. And I added the phrase in any given moment, right? So, what does it look like today to bring forth the best that's within me? What does that look like, right? And every day it's going to be different, right? Depending on our energy, the season that we're in, if we're navigating illness or not.
Right.
And so it's just a very forgiving way to think about it.
Mhm.
But I also have this 5-part framework in the book to help us find purposeful work or unearth that purposeful work. And so the 5 parts are aligning with our zone of genius or our gifts, connecting to our impact, being values aligned, feeling a sense of contentment, and having our needs met. And so the gifts piece, I think, is a really interesting one because it's one that we can kind of quickly get on the court with. So each and every one of us has a zone of genius. And no one's is above or below anybody else's. And the cool thing about that is it democratizes it, right? It's like we've all got something special to give. Yay.
Sure. Mhm.
But I think, again, sometimes when we think about zone of genius and we think about purposeful work, we think, well, I've got to live in that 100% of the time. Well, I'm somebody that really loves what they do and feels really devoted to it. But that's not 100% of the time, right? It's like I run a business. I'd say it's 65-35 for me. And I think that's really lucky.
Right.
Right, I think it's a form of privilege, and I don't know anybody that lives 100% and I'm only in my zone of genius and I never have to do anything outside of it. I don't think that's realistic.
Right.
And so the invitation is, can we find that zone of genius and just start by spending 10 minutes more there a day? And every day add a little bit, right? And over time, your life will feel markedly different. Again, it's not about perfection, but it's more time on the court with the things that you really came here to share.
Right. I think that's so I want to click back to something you just said, that purpose and perfection are conflated. I think that is such an important point for all of us to really take in. That's like total truth bomb that you just dropped. Because I think that is what happens, is that like for me to have purpose and meaning in what I'm doing, it has to be that purpose and meaning 100% of the time. I don't have to do the bills and the finances, and I don't have to do, sort of the scut work that you have to do when you first start. I have to be in my purpose and meaning all the time. So it's like this perfectionism. I think
Yes.
that's a really good way to say it.
Thank you. And I think so many spiritual lineages also talk about, well, how can we bring devotion into everything that we do, right? I
No.
remember one of my teachers saying, like, how can we bring devotion to doing the dishes? And I remember being like, are you kidding me? Really do not enjoy the dishes. But
Mhm.
I think it's a really cool practice because there's something to learn in everything, right? Versus if we go from that place of just rejecting it because we feel like it's so far outside of ourselves and our genius, but there's something beautiful to learn in all of it.
Right, right. It's so important. And I think, another thing that I wanted to ask about that this was coming up is that I know that part of what you talk about is that your ambition and your drive shouldn't be painful. It
Mhm.
should come from purpose. But I also think that that purpose is probably connected to feeling whole inside of yourself, like
Mhm.
feeling like you are healing, right? That you are whole. But I think so many people are in the process of becoming whole, but they still have dreams. They still have things that they want to do. So, how do we pursue those purposeful goals, that purposeful ambition, be in that space while we're still like learning and growing and healing and
Yeah.
trying to get there? How do we do that?
I love all of your questions. I think they're really wonderful and specific and have me think, which I really love. So I think we're always becoming, right? And one of the things
Mhm.
I say to people is like, we never entirely live in painful ambition, nor do we entirely live in purposeful ambition. We're always sort of becoming and evolving. And, if we look at the word integrity, integrity isn't about right or wrong. It's about wholeness. And I think wholeness in the moment, right? So what's integrity and wholeness for me in this moment as I am today, right? Without me needing to be this like, perfect, evolved, occupying all the pockets of myself
Right,
person, right? I'm not there yet. I don't know if I'll get there, right? Hopefully, maybe there's another couple lifetimes in me. I don't know.
right,
And so I think it's very much about, well, what is wholeness in this moment? What's integrity in this moment? And
right.
just allowing that to evolve over time.
Yeah, and I think that's a hard one because I think people don't always know that. It's really hard to know what is wholeness for me when I feel like I'm not and I'm searching for how to become whole. And
Mm.
I get this question a lot from people of sort of like, how do you become aware? These concepts of wholeness can become very esoteric. And so, one thing I often say to people is that it's a feeling of safety. And you mentioned this actually earlier. You said something about feeling safety in your body. And I think that is really related to, from a medical standpoint, is, a lot of polyvagal theory that, when you can have this safety, that will really precede, or that's sort of like the basis for us to be able to show up in the world with more purpose, with more creativity, to show up in a more whole way. You have to feel safe first. And I think that's so based on this, for me, anyways, this polyvagal theory. So, how does that sit for you with the whole idea of safety as being sort of maybe a way to quantify what wholeness feels like?
I love that. And I think that that's really lovely. And I also think that sometimes we're waiting to feel perfectly safe in our bodies, to feel perfectly whole, to be able to kind of like navigate life and make a choice. And I think that like we inch our way there, right? So if people are listening and they're like, I don't know that I've been able to find that safety. I think that we're right on time for our lives and we make the right choices for ourselves that clarify our experience and get us to the next place where eventually hopefully we can be making those choices from a place of safety. And so I love that definition. And also I think I know a lot of people that aren't quite there yet.
Right, for sure.
And like, it's totally fine. It's a work in progress, and we're still sort of clarifying and getting to where we need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I want to go back to something you were talking about before, which is the zone of genius, because I really want to make this practical for people who are listening. Well, first of all, what does that mean? But then if people don't feel aligned to their zone of genius, where do they start? What do we do to sort of tap into that zone of genius if we don't even know what it is for us?
Yes. Can I like have a soapbox moment here?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
So, our zone of genius is a place that we're just off the charts brilliant. It's just our innate gifts. We don't have to push, force, or effort. It just kind of flows through us. But I can't tell you how many people I sit across from and I'm like, okay, let's talk about your zone of genius. And they're like, I don't have one.
Yeah.
I'm good at a lot of things. I'm just not genius.
Mm.
I'm curious how you feel about that word.
I use that term zone of genius all the time.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
I love it. You're in
Yeah.
the camp of like, I'm comfy with it.
Yeah.
But I will give talks and I'll ask people like, who in this room feels like they have a zone of genius or would identify as genius? And nobody raises their hand and there's lots of reasons why. So when I was writing the book, I traced the word genius all the way back to ancient Rome, and it's always a hero and never a heroine. So there's that piece.
Yeah.
And then 92nd Street Y did a study, I think it was in 2016, and they were polling girls as young as 6. And even they thought that genius was a male trait and not a female trait.
Wow.
So there's all these stories about who gets to be genius, right? And we have these ideas about like IQ scores and aptitude tests and things like that. But when you look at the data, what those actually show is motivation more so than aptitude. And so what's really interesting is I think we have a lot of confusion around this topic.
Right.
Every single person has a zone of genius, has something that they came here to contribute that they are really off the charts amazing at, and they don't have to push or effort. But we're so resistant to own that label because of how we've come to understand geniuses. So I just want to level set that first and foremost.
Right. And so what you're saying is that we really associate the word genius with aptitude.
Yeah. And that it looks a particular way, right? Like maybe
Right.
it's the STEM professions, it's Einstein, it's high
Right.
IQ scores, and it's often male. That's basically like
Right.
what we're seeing in the
Right.
data.
So if you don't feel like you fit into one of those categories or all of those categories, you're never going to see yourself as a genius, or you're not going to
Exactly.
be able to. Yeah.
Exactly. You're like, I don't have anything genius to contribute. And it's just not the case. And the thing about that old version is that it perpetuates power dynamics, right? It tells us who we're going to serve, who we're going to be in service to, because this one person has the genius. But
Right.
when we remember that we each have that genius, it democratizes it, like we were talking about at the top of our
Yeah.
conversation. We all get to
Mhm.
own it together. And when we're in that conversation together, then we contribute something that's really beautiful and can shift culture
Right.
and all of those wonderful things. So I think that's one of the most important parts is first and foremost, just reclaiming the label.
Right.
And then once we're a bit more comfy with it, asking ourselves, well, where are the places that I am, really can contribute something that far outpaces what other people can? And
Right.
not in a weird competitive way, just that's what I brought to this planet.
Right. And so if you ask that question, right? So we're asking that question. And if someone still says, like, I don't know, I have no idea, where do they start to sort of even discover it or, play with this idea?
Yeah. Well, thinking about when you walk into a room or a community or your team, what's the thing that you layer in that wasn't there, right? Or if you took a look at your replicable successes, however you define success, right? Things that kind of worked really well, what are the things that you brought that allowed those things to be a replicable success? And what kind of flows through you without much effort, right? The kind of thing that you just lose track of time because you're just so caught up in the waves of that thing. And if you still don't know the answer, fun homework assignment, you can ask 3 to 5 people that see you fully, but see you fully really is the operative phrase here because people project.
Mhm.
And so really asking those people that know your essence
Right.
and can offer you something that is really helpful. And it might not always be exactly the same phrasing if you ask 3 to 5 people, but you'll start to see through lines.
Amazing. So it's really just maybe getting some help from some other people who know you well to say, what am I really good at? Right. That can often be a way to spur those thoughts in your head because you don't ever see yourself the way that other people see you.
No, of course, yeah,
Right.
of course we don't. And then
Exactly.
also, once you've asked yourself the question, I think it's so important that we start with self because we can do a lot of outsourcing.
Sure.
Once you've asked yourself, and then if you've asked your friends, you could also, I love human design, I love astrology. All of those
Mhm.
have small implications for our purpose and breadcrumbs in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, that leads in perfectly into my next question because even the Ayurvedic dosha system, right, also plays into that because, doshas really tell us everything about a person. It can tell us your emotional responses to things, your physical traits, the things that you are most susceptible to any time of the year, every season. What are the things that are going to throw you out of balance and have a symptom, a signal show up for you, right?
Mhm.
So I happen to know what your dosha is. Is it
Yeah.
okay if we talk about your
Yeah,
dosha?
please, please. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Because you are Pitta, and which is all fire, and I am Pitta Kapha, which is fire and earth, right? You and I both know that fire fuels ambition, and both of us have a lot of that. So when your Pitta gets overworked and it's
Mhm.
really overactivated, the masks and the wounds that you were talking about,
Yeah.
the masks are actually fire symptoms,
Oh,
actually.
that's so cool. I feel like we need to collab on a book
Yeah,
or something about
I
it.
know. They totally go together because perfectionism, martyrdom, right?
Mm.
Productivity, right?
Control, masochism, dependence avoidance, perfectionist. Yeah.
Yeah. So those 3 that you said you see in a lot in your clients, right? That is all pitta. That's all fire, and that's like too much fire, right? So what's your real life protocol to help yourself regulate that? Like, these masks are fully on, you've got the fire burning, the pitta's out of control. What do you do to self-regulate yourself?
Yes, I love this question. And you and I had dinner a couple of months ago, and I remember saying to you, we were talking about my dosha, and I was saying, like, yeah, sometimes I just have so much fire and there's no place for that fire to go. So I just turn it on myself.
Yep.
And you were like, that is classic.
That's classic. That's exactly, we become very self-critical. We not only turn the criticism towards ourselves, but we start sending it out to other people too,
100%.
right?
100%.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I just found myself getting really close to the line a lot of the time. I wouldn't cross the line, but I'd get really close to it. And the masks that came up for me were definitely control and perfectionism. And I just kept watching it. I just kept saying, okay, all right, there's me really trying to control everything that is completely out of my control that I have no business controlling. Or
Right.
here I'm being way too rigid and I need to bring in some flexibility. And so it really, for me, it's mindfulness practices, right? It's noticing it, then bringing in some of the nervous system tools. I meditate regularly. Like I'm putting in the inputs to expand the window of tolerance, but sometimes the window of tolerance gets really small because you just have all these other stressors. Then you need these moment to moment tools. So the nervous system work, the mindfulness, but also the nature. I really feel like that would be so helpful when I was just watching myself be ridiculous. I'd be like, okay, now go take a walk. Like get up from your chair. You're not going to solve it in this chair with your
Mhm.
mind, right?
Right.
So just go move your body, go take in the
Mhm.
fresh air and see what's different afterwards. And everything was different
Yeah.
afterwards. And so for me, it was really just those moment to moment tools.
Yeah, and I mean, you're doing exactly what we do in Ayurveda, which is this golden principle of like increases like,
Mm.
opposites reduce, right? So
Sure.
you feel this fire going out of control, and so you're like, okay, I need to balance this. Let me go outside. Let me get some air. Let me get some earth, right? Those are going to help balance that fire. So you naturally are doing things to help that. Sometimes people will maybe ease up on the hot and spicy and greasy foods, right? So
Mhm.
that they're cooling their diet down. Maybe pull back from social media and from media consumption because that will just increase the fire, right? The comparison, the perfectionism, because it helps us put those masks right back on, right? That you're
Yes.
talking about. So I think that there's so many ways that we can self-regulate if we even just think about it from that perspective of balancing that fire that's coming up and is sort of that painful ambition that you're talking about versus purposeful ambition.
Yeah. I love the examples that you brought in, and it made me think about one other thing that I don't do enough, but when I do bring it in, it's like so game changing. So, I was a bit of a parentified child, and so I have gotten a lot of feedback over the years about being too much work and not enough play. And
Right.
then a couple years ago, I actually hired a creativity coach because I was like, I'm so tired of this feedback. Like, I need to learn how to play and just incorporating more play in my life and thinking about, well, what are the other aspects of our identity? Because we can over identify with the working part. And it's very easy in
Sure.
capitalism, right? Where we're like,
Yep.
our worthiness is connected to our output.
Right.
But there's all these other aspects of ourselves, right? Like I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm somebody that's really silly. I'm somebody that like
Mhm.
loves to be in their body and move around a lot because I have that privilege. And so just thinking about play more and
Yeah.
more as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what did you find out about yourself? How did you learn to play more or
Oh
be
my
more
God.
creative?
It was pretty I wish, like, somebody could have videoed it because the first session was kind of hilarious where they were, like they were showing me their home, and they're like, "Yeah, I've got all these PlayStations set up, like, here's where I make my music, here's where I paint, here's where I dance," and they were like, "What do you have?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me? That's why I'm here, like, I don't understand anything that you just said."
Right, right.
And so they were like, "Okay, homework assignment, like, you need to go play." So I remember I literally went to a Duane Reade, and I went to the stationery section, and I
Uh-huh.
got a sketch pad and some markers and, like, a
Right.
spirograph set,
Yep.
and I went home and I was like, "I don't even know how to" and I just remember being so mad about the whole thing of, like, "I
Yeah.
don't know what to do, and I can't get this right."
Right.
But, like, little by little, I learned to just kinda come back to that younger version of myself that knew how to make a
Mhm.
game out of anything.
Right. You know what? I love that you did that. I love those little spirograph. I don't know what even they're called, but I have them also. But you know, what's coming up for me as you're saying that is that this idea of play, actually, I feel like, again, this whole idea of conflating terms.
Mm.
I think that so many people conflate this idea of playing with having to go on vacation, having to escape from their everyday life, right?
Yep.
And this is a question, conversation I'm having with a lot of my best friends from college. We're all above 50 and we're sort of in that next phase of life. We've sent our kids off to school and launched them, and what's next, right? And we've been talking about this idea of like, how do you build a life that doesn't need an escape? Sort of to your point, how do you actually incorporate that play? Because so many of us live for vacations and for weekends, right? That's kind of survival mode, right?
Yep.
How do you design your every day so that you can nourish yourself in this way, like with this play that you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. So, one of the most important reframes on ambition that I think is in the book is that culturally we come to think of ambition as more for more's sake all the time, that more
Mhm.
money, more
Yep.
power, more achievement, like, right? Like, more
Yeah.
books I sell,
Yeah.
then I'll be happy. But I actually think ambition moves like nature. I think it goes in cycles, right? So, you have these moments where you want to grow. So, you put the seed in the ground, you take care of the environment, and you grow. You have this beautiful peak, right? But then the seasons change and you wind down and you go back underground and you rest there until you're nurtured enough to rise again. And I don't think that we move cyclically enough. And so I launched my book May 13th and had like, quite a big push in the beginning,
Yeah.
but then the summer slowed down.
Right.
So people were messaging me like, "What's next? What are you up to?" And I would just send them pictures of myself on the beach. I was like, "I'm underground. I'm in the underground season. I got no inspo for any of you until I'm nurtured enough that
Yeah.
I can rise again."
Mhm.
And building that cyclical nature into our work and our lives, I think, is so important. And a lot of people say, like, well, I work for a company and it's just busy all the time. And I think that there's macro ways that we can move like that. And then there's
Mhm.
micro ways that we can move like that. So I'll even work with people that are in corporate and we'll look at their week and we'll say, well, where do you have the agency in your schedule? Can we
Mhm.
design the cycles inside of those pockets where you have the agency? It
Mhm.
is it is possible, even if we feel like we have a lot of resistance to it.
Mhm. And so it's really, I mean, to a very practical point is what you're saying is that like literally looking at your schedule and putting it into your schedule, that time for that cyclical sort of like you're really productive on these days, or I mean, I shouldn't even use the word productive. You're working or whatever it is, but then you're adding this creativity, this playtime into your week so that you don't forget about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like designing with intention. Like over the summer, I was working 2.5 days a week.
Mhm.
And that felt lovely because I really needed to recoup the energy that I'd spent earlier. And to just like, I gave myself days to just wander because I'd been so structured for so long,
Yeah,
which like doesn't always feel good for me. So I was
sure.
like, I need a day to just be like, I got no plans, nothing on the schedule, and I'm just going to like kind of go where the day takes me.
Mhm.
And again, I know that's a form of privilege, but even thinking about the pockets in which we could do that. If we have 2 hours on a Saturday where somebody
Mhm.
else is watching the kids, can you, in those 2 hours, give yourself time to wander, be unstructured, be
Mhm.
outside?
Right, right. So it's really just really having that mindset of how do I work this into my everyday life? Because otherwise what happens, and I know this happens to me too, you go on vacation and it takes you the first 2 or 3 days to even just settle down because you have been in this go, go, go mode. And then, yeah, and like half your vacation's over and you're like, oh, now I'm relaxed. But like,
Right.
I feel like if you could do this all the time where you weren't living for vacation to be an escape from your life, maybe it wouldn't take so long to relax into vacation, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you've coached a lot of really, really top performers, really quote, successful people. What's the number one pattern that you see that keeps even these successful people stuck?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it always surprises me so much, right? It's like, I think one of the best parts about my job is that you just sit across from, you're like, everybody's human. We're all dealing with the same things. We all have this very similar operating systems. So many people just feel like they're not enough, right? And so then they're like, well, I've got to move the goalpost to achieve another thing so that I can feel like I'm enough. And even the people that are at like the tippy top of their game, right? Whether in, a Fortune 10 company or an Olympian, and they're just like, it's not enough. It's never enough. Right. And so, really coming back to that space of contentment and defining our goals differently and from that place of wholeness. But I
Mhm.
see so many people struggle with that.
Right. So really it's that the block is not feeling like they're enough.
Exactly.
Even though they have achieved so much, they
Hmm.
still don't feel like they're enough.
Right, which is why they're still on that achievement hamster wheel. And it looks like it can look really subtle and sneaky, right? Because they're doing all the wellness practices and they're like, I'm really mindful. And
Yeah.
then you pull back a couple layers and really the essence is like, I don't feel good enough to like the idea of not allowing ourselves to move in cycles or kind of have these pockets of rest is because we don't feel like we're worthy enough, right? Well, like I have to keep contributing in order to feel worthy. And so it keeps us tethered.
But it's interesting that you're saying that we even, a lot of these people who are very high achievers will say that they're doing all these wellness practices and maybe they are, but
Mhm.
that's actually covering up even more is what you're saying. It's covering up even more of their insecurity of not being enough.
100%. I've seen so many people their morning routine is simply a reflection of the perfectionism mask, right?
Yeah.
Where they are like, okay, well, I've done an hour in front of the red light. I did yoga. I did time in the sauna. I did the cold plunge. Like I did the intermittent. And it's just like, this is not support. This is control, right? This is control and
Right.
perfectionism. This is not support. And so we have to have very honest conversations when that happens.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that that is something I identify with so much because I hear that so much from patients because they're like, if I can just get the perfect morning routine or the perfect way to eat, whatever it is, there's so much of perfectionism and like I have to do it exactly the right way for it to have an effect on me.
Yeah.
It's sort of defeating the whole purpose because you're not actually bringing your stress level down. You're increasing your stress because you are trying to do all these wellness practices.
And perfectionism is so interesting, right? It's like, well, one, why do we need it? And two, like it's not even helpful, right? In reality, I wrote about this in my Substack, but I was just kind of starting to talk about it publicly. So I'm somebody that has rumbled with perfectionism and I call myself a reformed perfectionist. And
Mhm.
I feel like next levels of our lives kind of bring out the wounds and the masks in slightly different ways. So I'd done all this work on my control and perfectionism. I was like, we're doing great, right?
Right.
And the book comes out, and the day that the book launched, I was on CBS, the morning show.
Mhm.
And I think just subconsciously, I had this awareness there's just more eyes on you now, right? It's like you weren't on the morning show before, you're on the morning show now. And I wasn't consciously aware of it, but I get there and they're doing the interview. And I think if anybody watched the interview back, they wouldn't know. They'd be like, great interview, right?
Right.
But I knew, right? I stumbled on a talking point and then I just like ruthlessly raked myself over the coals for it for like weeks until I was willing to talk about it like in therapy and nervous system work. And then what I came to is like, it's not actually about like landing the talking point perfectly, right?
Right.
Life is learning how to recover well because life is
Yes.
always going to be up and down, right? It's never going to be the smooth. Well, there are moments of smooth, right? But for the
Mhm.
most part, it's up and down and we have to ride the middle. So
Right.
life is like, how well can I recover? And then I was like, cool, now I'm going to make every interview a practice of how well can I recover? Like that's my new practice instead of like, we have to do this perfectly. How well can I recover? And I feel like that translates to the morning routine and all the places where we're bringing in the perfectionism.
Right. Right. I love that story. And actually, I've seen that interview of yours, and I would never. I don't even know what you're talking about. Like I would never be able to pick out any talking point that you stumbled over.
Bless you. It was like a blackout moment, and I was like, "Wow,
I'm
wow."
sure that it wasn't. You're very hard. See, you're even being hard on yourself right now. So
But I'm actually really proud of, like, how I recovered in that moment, because like, I
yeah,
wasn't even thinking about recovery at that point, I was just, like, land the talking point.
right.
But looking back, I'm like, "Great recovery, girl."
Okay, so I have a sentence I want you to finish
Okay.
because I think this might help a lot of people. You're not burned out because you work hard. You're burned out because fill in the blank.
Because you work too hard and you do too little of what really nourishes you. Both things.
Wow. So that's a truth bomb because people will often say to me, I'm so burnt out. I'm so burnt out. I mean, I even say that sometimes. I find myself saying that, right? I'm so burnt out. And they think that, again, these kinds of wellness practices or going to get a massage, these are all things that are wonderful and are going to help you. But let's peel back the layers, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and also, like, what really nourishes us, right? I think so many of us are like,
Mm,
"Yes, okay, the cold plunge, the sauna, the workout," but it's like, well, when was the last time, like, you really sat in a circle with your community, right? When was the last time you
right.
put your head in somebody's lap and told them really, like, what was on your heart, right? Like, I think those are the things that, and it's different for everybody, right?
Sure,
But, like,
sure.
really truly nourishes us versus what's checking a box.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's really getting away from that perfectionism, the control. Because again, what you're saying is that you turn all of these things, this awareness, and you think like, okay, I'm going to help myself. I'm doing the right thing. But then it's just another way of showing up with that mask again.
Yeah,
It's like we're really tricky. We can do that to ourselves, right?
we are tricky people, yeah.
So, what's one really unusual but maybe powerful practice that you really think a lot of people don't talk about that could really be really healing for people who are really sort of driven by ambition, purposeful ambition, hopefully not painful? What's something that's small, accessible that someone could start doing today to help them with that?
I really love getting outside, and I do think, like, moments in nature are so transformative, right? It's like we know that the ions at the beach are different than the ions in a city, right? And that actually has an impact on our nervous system. And one
Right.
thing that you talk about is, like, getting outside first thing for our circadian rhythm. And
Sure.
so I think if you can get outside first thing, if you can, like, feel your actual feet on the ground, if you can touch a plant, if you can smell a plant,
Mhm.
all of those things I think actually have really big impacts, more so than we know.
Yeah. I love it. So I just have one last question for you. This podcast is called The Healing Catalyst.
Mhm.
And so if you could just think of one thing that you want every listener to really think about after hearing this conversation to put into practice, what would that be? What would be a healing catalyst for them?
I really think looking at the core wounds and the masks because they drive so many things, right? You'll start to see that it's not just your relationship to ambition, it's in your friendships, it's in your interpersonal relation, like it's everywhere. It's how we're making decisions and choices and how we're moving through life. And so if you can spend some time with the wounds and masks and just start noticing them, I think it will radically shift your day to day.
I love that. Amina, thank you so much for doing this with me. I know people are going to learn so much from this. You've given us so many good things to think about. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm such a fan, you know that. And I also think you have such a beautiful soul. And anytime I sit with you, I feel like it's been a catalyst for my healing. So thank you.
So, one of the moments that really hit me hard in this episode was when Amina talked about how core wounds that so many of us walk around with every day and the masks that we use to cope really affect us, right? Things like, I'm not enough, or I don't belong, or I am not worthy. And then how we overachieve to try to control everything just so we can feel safe. I literally thought she was talking about me because honestly, those were the exact patterns that led me to my own burnout. You know, her book, The Ambition Trap, is such a powerful and incredible resource for making sense of all of this, especially if you've ever felt stuck in the hustle but didn't really know why. I really hope that this episode is a reminder to you that your drive and your ambition don't have to come at the cost of your own well being and your health. You can succeed and feel healthy and well doing it. As always, thank you for listening and thank you for being part of this community. And remember, healing isn't just possible, it's in your power. Until next time, be well. Thank you for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you found this episode helpful, please hit follow and share it with a friend. And if you feel inspired, please rate and review because it helps others find this podcast more easily. For more insights and tips, head to my website at avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at Avanti Kumar Singh. I loved sharing this episode with you. My hope is that you heard something today that sparks a catalyst in your healing journey and helps you build lasting health. Be well, and I'll see you next time. This is a Dante 32 production.